My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Really pleased to be joined today by Alberto Rizzoli from V7. Great to have you here on this wonderful rainy day.
Great to be here, Matt. Yeah, it's kind of dark, but looking forward to telling our story and chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to finding out more as well. And do you want to kick things off by just giving us a little bit of background about yourself and telling people what V7 is, what it does?
Yeah, this is my second company in the AI space, and specifically in computer vision. V7 is a platform for labeling image data. You effectively tell an AI what's on a picture that's relevant to you so that you can let it know new objects, learn new objects, or improve its performance over time, with the goal of helping companies from multiple industries, from healthcare to industrial inspection to simply SaaS companies that process a lot of images, to create AI that can process this unstructured data, whether it's images, videos, so they can understand their contents, the relationship between objects, and effectively study them like humans would.
Yeah.
I started it in 2018, in late 2018, with my co-founder, Simon Edwardson. And Simon and I were also co-founders in a previous computer vision AI company called iPoly back in San Francisco. So V7 is sort of a continuation of those learnings, those mistakes that we made back in the previous one. And before that, I even had another startup that died. It never really got to any VC funding level. So I've always been trying to start my own thing ever since I was a uni student, and never quite had a real job except for internships. I interned at Google. I interned at a bank before that, and dreaded that experience. And always thought that I would sort of the quant nerds like myself like the idea of compounding effects as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I do feel like starting your own company is one of the best ways to compound, either starting or joining really early and getting that initial equity. I've always been motivated by big wins, and from an intellectual perspective, to scratch an itch, I find that the current state of deep learning makes it the most exciting piece of technology that humanity has in its hands and can realistically mold into something impactful. So I wanted to be part of that revolution, which is likely going to last for the next 5 to 10 years, and then maybe we're going to move away from the silicon paradigm that we're in. But I feel like the right timing is now for the space.
Yeah, interesting. And why start your own company rather than join an established startup? You know, there's got some funding in place, and potentially, the ability to teach you more things on the get-go. Why dive straight in at the deep end?
From an internal perspective, there's a bit of ambition and a bit of arrogance. The ambition is, you see these young entrepreneurs out there that make it, and you have this terrible bias because you only see the ones that make it through, and then go on the news for having started something that reached unicorn status, and you think that you can do it as well. So there's a bit of ambition, then a bit of arrogance in believing that you can learn everything on the job. And ironically, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you do end up learning a job. You end up making a lot of mistakes. But potentially, if I were to have joined, say, Apple beforehand, every now and then I think, hey, if I had joined a successful tech company beforehand, I would have avoided this mistake, or I would have known exactly how to do this. On the other side, though, I think it also creates a lot of caution around you. And being an entrepreneur sometimes is also about being unreasonably risky with your career and with your choices. And you realize that V7 is now a team of almost 100 people, and you realize that now that sometimes you're a good decision maker when you are a little bit foolish and a little bit risk friendly. Otherwise, you overanalyze every situation and try to make 100 people happy. On the other side, I'm also the fourth generation of entrepreneurs in my family. my great-grandfather was an orphan and started a small print shop, which at its height became the second largest publishing company in Europe. Published anything from books to magazines to then, cameras were invented. So it became cinema, movies, and then that was inherited by my grandfather. And then my father started a movie publishing company. None of the three ever used a computer in their lives, including my dad, who passed away without ever owning a phone. It was used my mom's phone for phone calls and nothing else. And I was the tech guy in the family instead. So the computers person in the family, and always had the fascination, which was never shared by them.
No, I think that's really interesting, but definitely a family history of entrepreneurship in a vision-related field, albeit quite different from a technology perspective.
Yeah, indeed. From reading stuff to seeing stuff to then analyzing what you see. At the end of the day, it was also technology. My great-grandfather started a printing business, but he imported a brand new machine design from Germany to make the first grayscale images on books for Italians. And Italians in the space in between the two great wars were illiterate. To a large part, they were illiterate people that were learning to read through books. And the presence of images really enticed them to dig into this cool new medium. The TikTok of the days were novels.
Yeah.
And yes, likewise with cinema, there's been revolutions that we consider boring today, but GPT-3 of those eras were Technicolor, and that felt like magic back then. It took a lot of effort to put it together, but it did feel like magic. And today we're just I think chasing the next thing that feels magical to us and that motivates us to go to work every day because it's cool. 10 years time, maybe the stuff that we're working on today will no longer be cool.
Yeah, it's definitely very, very cool, very trendy. At the moment, I don't think, the past, even just 2 months, especially, there's just an explosion of AI related content and publicity. And, the ChatGPT has certainly massively accelerated awareness of AI technology. I think before people were aware of AI tech, but perhaps didn't really trust how many of those technologies truly were AI versus a clever algorithm, and also mistrust, perhaps didn't fully appreciate exactly what capabilities could be opened up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was an underestimation by folks that were outside of the academic space of AI. And there's also a incredibly serendipitous timing with the fall of crypto and the rise of AI, which I think is completely unrelated to one another, but certainly comes at a strange timing where we used to have these two forces, one of them that actually was more capitalized than AI in probably for far less impact and for far less demonstration of any realism of whether it was working or not.
Yeah.
And now there's being this massive shift in one direction. Both of them very valid technologies, but I think we're now starting to see that the cat's out of the bag with AI, and just these demos that are available online publicly demonstrate that the impact is going to be similar to the smartphone. And the next big thing that the tech companies were looking for to continue raising their stock prices here. And it's called the neural network, and it just compresses enormous amounts of information. We deal with vision, so it's a subset of what AI does. And the interesting thing with computer vision or analyzing images and video and medical scans is that it's you can make these predictions in a very mathematical way. An image is a pixel grid, so it's a matrix. And it's an order of magnitude more complex than a piece of text in natural language, which is what is now wooing the world with ChatGPT and its various synchronization, anthropic coherence, and so on. And the prediction you do is in 2 years' time, we're going to have similar capabilities. Actually, probably 18 months' time, we're going to have similar capabilities in vision that we're seeing today with these models that are fascinating, even the least technical among us. And the implications of this are massive for jobs that we thought were pretty safe until now. But they're also massive for the impact that they can have in areas that we don't usually talk about, like drug discovery or clinical research or Alzheimer's research. the fact that we can use now models to understand cells under a microscope and truly understand the relationship between them, truly understand the development of diseases that are going to kill us, could sort of be this Gilgamesh moment for humanity, in which we now have a key for solving the stuff that are too complex for our tiny brains.
And from a technological and knowledge perspective, then what do you think that has changed so recently that is suddenly opening up and enabling a lot of these, technologies to be developed?
The answer is actually rather boring. We had this. There's many components. So there's training data on one side, there's network architectures, and then there's hardware.
Yeah.
Training data is the stuff that we deploy on the internet that has a description that we can use as a label and image pair. And it's also what V7 produces as a company. There's training data on the internet, and there's training data inside companies. And the majority of world GDP is actually inside companies, although the general internet is very valuable. Google already crawls it multiple times.
Yeah.
Then there's network architectures, how the neural network is put together so that it's most efficient at giving you the right answer. We have now started to plateau on this. Paper called Attention is All You Need from 2017 established that this transformer architecture was one of the best ways of structuring a neural net. And still today, we're kind of sitting on these shoulders. And there hasn't been massive changes in there, although there's been some very clever development. But the paradigm is the one that we're working on. And then there's hardware, which continues to evolve. It's now slowing down quite significantly because of this 5 nanometer limitation that we have in chip fabrication, which is, chip design and chip fabrication far above my pay grade. But we got to this point, at least, we got to the point at which we can create these trillion parameter models and run them on massive data centers. And it just happened to converge now. And it's, if you have ever seen the Nick Bostrom graph of, when will we realize that super intelligence is here? It's not like you see it in the distance and you can anticipate it. It sort of passes you from like a bus. And the time frame in which AI is the village idiot and Einstein and then super Einstein is a matter of weeks or days. And this is sort of what's happening. GPT-2 and other language models, I keep mentioning OpenAI, but there's other fantastic competitors of them out there, was a village idiot on a year ago, and now it's extraordinary. And this is simply because of the size of models that we're able to garner, the size of training data that's available on the internet. We've written all these answers and questions on Quora and Stack Overflow, and we've basically just given AI all of our intelligence on the internet and neatly able to then categorize it and let it just read it for hours and hours on end.
Absolutely. I think, like most people have been, massively impressed by the capabilities of some of these tools, like ChatGPT, but also, some of the content generative AIs that are out there as well, audio as well as videos as well as text. But I think most people are surprised that those models are able to be so good. The quality is there, and the quality of data, as you say, the amount of data that it's got available to it is absolutely massive. We've been putting it online for many, many years without realizing that's how it could be harnessed.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about it, if a model now there's a lot of work on multimodal research, so video, audio, text at the same time. And if a model were to review this podcast with the visuals, with the audio, and then just learn the transcript and maybe look at some of your other content out there, it could probably generate an episode on its own. We're not too far from that.
No.
And it makes you think, what is it actually then that matters, and what gets people to consume this content? Most of the time, the delta is just authenticity. That's the one thing that AI can generate particularly well, because it's a human concept that we consider to be something that's outside of our normal distribution. It's, the implications are not necessarily scary. They're just a little bit daunting. But I think the thing that's worth knowing is that this is sort of like a freight train that's going to smash through whatever is on its way. And if you, as the listener, are considering to boycott this in any way, it's unfortunately for you going to be very hard because your neighbor is going to just make it happen, and then it's going to be a very unfair competition. If we ever say, hey, this is not how we should be building AI, then another company or another country or whatnot is still going to develop something that will eventually make some aspects of content creation not obsolete but trivial, to the point where I see it in a positive light. I just see it that it's going to be a lot easier to produce any form of written content, media, and creative media. And then we're really going to start paying attention to what's different and kooky and out of the norm out there that comes from a little bit of that human unpredictability and craziness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the people that are genuinely good at what they do, they'll be able to stand out whilst at the same time utilizing many of the benefits these technologies can provide. I remember at uni, learning about different models of human-computer interaction, and you hear about computer-assisted versus human-assisted technology. And I think tech like this can very much put more problems into that domain of computer-assisted, where you're almost kind of playing that role of navigator, steering it, or editor, creating the output, steering and guiding and refining the output. But you can certainly, it's a massive time saver, and it saves the boring bits.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. It's almost like it's taking us back to an older time in which we are the kings and we are lazy, but we call the shots. And we have a very clever and very very effortful advisor that will produce content for us, and then we'll tell, make it in this style, or make the shoe more blue rather than red, and then they'll do the work for us. Sort of like being the Pope and then telling Michelangelo how he should paint his artwork for us.
Yeah, almost. To bring it back to V7 then, and what you're doing there, and I know you mentioned your previous company, which was also in the kind of AI vision related space. I wonder if you could just kind of briefly explain the differences between what you're developing at V7 and the previous company.
Yeah, iPoly was largely a B2C app. They used AI on smartphones to analyze the world, and it was still with a general purpose model in mind of being able to analyze any object and speak it back at you. So if you were blind or visually impaired, you would have an idea of what's in front of your phone's camera. It would basically be a talking camera, if you will. And the difficulty there is in the accessibility market, which is a very tough one to crack unless you sell into insurance. And so we pivoted it into being able to provide this technology to businesses that needed some form of visual understanding. Okay. But that's what led us to eventually develop the backbone of V7 as an independent company, because we needed something that would allow companies to upload their data and train AI on their objects. When you think about it, the general internet that large models learn from today, these massive research companies learn on today, only contain the stuff that you can find on Google search generally. So they don't actually know how you build a Boeing 747, because that's not available on the internet, but that's available inside Boeing's intranet. And Boeing wants to make AIs that can inspect whether the assembly of the 747 is going well or not, and to flag any potential issues, and to understand if the replacement parts are the right ones. And all this information that inside this multi-billion-dollar company should also be fed to AI. And that's what V7 helps companies do with their images, video, and any form of visual process that they have internally. They're able to load it onto our platform, point out what's relevant to be identified, and then these models train to identify these objects over time. There's nuances to it in the technical side. They can train their own models. They can train models directly through V7. We leave that up to the current standards of how data science is done. But there's definitely a trend that we're moving towards, which is similar to what we're seeing with large language models, that you can create something that just understands the world visually quite well and understands 3D geometry, or in the medical case, just the nuances of nuclear imagery. And then from there, you tell it, hey, this is a tumor. This is an enlarged bladder. This is something that I don't want to see inside a patient. So please flag it if you see future ones. And the difference is one of them is the previous company was heralding a technology that was more of a B2C piece of tech and more vertically integrated, whilst V7 is we like to see it in the same category that Stripe is for the e-commerce market, where it's a piece of infrastructure to enable the development of any kind of AI company for the identification of one of the 150 plus use cases that we see within the platform. The cool thing about AI is that it's effectively this massive sledgehammer to any process, where we will start to see thousands of companies that will apply AI to many processes where AI can sit well within. And some of these will be acquired and then they will become the AI division of a larger company. Some of them will become specialists in serving a specific market or a specific region. But there's really a lot to be done in many regions of it. And we enable them to effectively take companies, data from companies, and then turn them into AIs that understand this data, this domain particularly well.
And what kind of industries are you doing that with?
So healthcare is one of the largest ones we serve. Healthcare, life sciences, we sometimes bundle them together because what you see in a microscope can be used for both health and research. And one of the reasons is that the completion of a task in healthcare is really high value per, say, image, as opposed to a content moderation example, which is one of the notoriously less relevant ones. Content moderation is when you post a picture to Twitter, Twitter sends it through a neural net to see whether there's any pornography or gore on it. And if there are glimpses of it, it might send it through a queue for humans to verify that.
Yeah.
And in healthcare instead, you normally have a doctor analyze this stuff. And healthcare costs are largely tied to human costs and to research costs. When you think about the massive amount that the Britain pays and the US pays for healthcare costs, it's because the stuff is hard and we bundle it, and sometimes we cheat on top of it, and healthcare companies might charge crazy premiums, but by and large, it's because we need really smart people to do this stuff. And AI serves a promise of really curbing this cost and making health services available to anyone. This means adding images of CT scans and then letting companies teach AIs what's wrong with this patient or what's right with this patient, and then letting it understand it over time. Second area of focus for us is what we call industrial, which is anything from defect inspection, manufacturing, to routine inspection of infrastructure, basically anything that needs to be observed in the world by companies that take care of the physical side of things. So anything that breaks because of entropy of the universe that we're in. And it's a surprisingly large sector. There's everything that's built around us requires maintenance. And this is something that we see AI robotics as an increasingly common medium to go and check that things are okay. And then another area that we see a lot of growth is what we call high tech, or any SaaS company where you post a picture, normally now sends that picture or video through a neural net to make sure that things are fine with it. There's no inappropriate content, or it just understands what content does it contain so that it can route it to the right user or apply the right tags so that the right person sees it.
Yeah, I see. And yeah, I can definitely see how with the healthcare and the other areas as well, that it certainly is a kind of expert operation, therefore an expensive operation for humans to get involved with. But one thing I'm wondering is, how have you found the trust side of things and the reception of this technology in an industry which can often be accused of being quite behind the times in terms of technology, with quite outdated, systems that they're using?
Yeah, we specifically cater our product to high reliability AI usage. So if you've ever used an AI product, most of the time you'll get a result, and you can set something like a temperature to make sure that the result is either edgier than it should or it's conservative.
Yeah.
What V7 exposes is the confidence of every minute answer that the model gives, so that this confidence can be quite reliable, so that the user on the other side can tell that this is a suggestion from the AI, but it's not a very confident one. And moreover, we're able to issue corrections to these so that users can then improve the performance of that AI for future examples. And this is done in a workflow system. So in healthcare, you often don't have AI working alone. You have AI plus humans working in a workflow. And this is like a drag and drop builder where you can define the route of a file or a patient study, where first it goes through an AI. That AI might tell maybe, what part of the body am I looking at, and then route it to another AI that will scan the contents of an MRI scan and then surface all of its predictions, and then send it to a junior person, a junior doctor that will or medical student that will perform some checks on it, and then maybe send it to a senior person only if it detects a certain anomaly that is or a lesion that is worth looking at. And these are all done in an automated fashion because the people of the world process hundreds of millions of patient scans every few months. So it's a very laborious, intense process, even from just an admin perspective, to look at images.
No, I think that's really interesting. I think how you've described that workflow certainly makes a lot of sense. And I think when people, hearing about capabilities of AIs, often try and slot them into existing workflows. And whilst at a high level, obviously the workflows are kinds of things that they're doing is broadly the same. I think the interesting thing will be to see what that impact is on those kind of lower level processes and operations within companies.
Yeah, there's a parallel to RPA here. RPA was really big 5 years ago, and it's still really big, but I think it's starting to see the sunset of its explosive growth, and simply because AI is the new RPA. And something we wanted to make sure we would capture is what will RPA look like when neural networks can do all this fancy stuff, including clicking on your screen. Like they have the capabilities of performing actions as well.
Yeah.
And sort of this is the paradigm that we're there. I don't think we've converged to the final design. Every piece of software has like many initial designs, and then we all converge to the same. This is why interfaces now all kind of look the same. Smartphones all look the same.
Yeah.
There is what we tend to consider an ultimate design until the next best thing comes along. And I think we're maybe 50% of the way there with AI workflows.
So where do you think at the moment then AI isn't quite there yet? Where does it need more development, more time to mature?
So the simple rule of thumb is that the more complex your data structure is, the more unstructured it is, the more AI needs time. So language is a vector, is a string of numbers, and we are doing really well in that. Images is a matrix, so you now have another dimension to it. Then, space or video, if you think about it, it's technically a 4-dimensional image because it's a stack of images placed over time. Yeah. And these all deteriorate in the quality of results. But I think that video, which is where AI is now doing the worst, has also the biggest potential, because to read the entire internet gets you ChatGPT, which is very impressive. To be able to see videos about the entire world gives you more nuanced understandings of the world that go beyond the word salad understanding that these language models are exhibiting. Like they only fool you into thinking that they have logical reasoning, but through vision in video, they could actually exhibit some visual reasoning. From a practical perspective, the world of industry, so not the world of demoing AI on your browser, still needs 99% accuracy to be able to input a process. And you wouldn't go to a doctor if their results were 90% accurate. If you had 10% chance of surviving something or not surviving something, that would still be an unacceptable threshold for you to gamble on. If you had a manufacturing plant that detected defects in your engine 90% of the time, that would also be unacceptable
Yeah.
because that would be 10% of vehicles could be recalled, or whatever 10% times the frequency of the defect, but it's still bad. In mechanical engineering, you normally have like 5 nines, or sometimes 6 nines of reliability needed.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing for that in AI. So a big part of the post-academic work that companies like ourselves do that apply AI into industrial processes is in making sure that we can translate this genius of AI into reliability, into being able to predict when it doesn't know stuff, and spotting these difficult cases and flagging them as like, I don't know this, so I'm going to set it to a human to verify this actual error.
Yeah, I think that accuracy is really interesting, and I know, obviously seeing a lot of the press about Tesla, Elon, autopilot, all those things there. I know comparing statistics against human drivers and the error rate and everything else, you can prove that it's statistically much safer than the general population. Yet for people consuming that technology, and maybe it's just the media trying to put a spin on it, but it seems that people, almost because it's a computer system which previously would have been extremely predictable, that they seem to put on board an extra level of expectation about that accuracy and reliability. Is that something you've seen as well?
Yeah, I think so. Once we are far more forgiving to humans than we are to technology about the mistakes that we make. It is probably objectively true that humans are better at driving cars than autonomous driving right now. They're maybe not safer, but they are better because they're a little bit better at improvising. But even when cars will be particularly good, we will be really annoyed at their mistakes in a way in which we are not annoyed at your cab driver, because we empathize a lot more with the ape on the driving seat than with the computer on the driving seat. So let's get ready for that. We will be some very moody users of AI in the future. And this is something that we see ourselves as well, where we're a software company that produces software for developing AI. And this software also contains a lot of humans that make mistakes. These humans are labelers. They effectively are humans that will tag images, that will place boxes around objects that need to be identified, or polygons to encircle them and segment them.
Yeah.
And when a human makes a mistake, it's, we just ask, hey, there's a few mistakes here. These need to be corrected. And that's often forgiven a lot more than if the software croaks or if it deletes an annotation by mistake. There's this immediate betrayal of trust because we expect software to be infallible and entirely deterministic. And so I think we will probably carry a bit of this bias in AI, which is a lot more probabilistic as a piece of software. And we already see ChatGPT, for example, making a lot of confident mistakes without telling you that it's not sure about something. It will confidently say that something is so.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to go up to a person, a human, and say, oh, by the way, you got this a little bit wrong here. Can you try and learn from that and not make that same mistake again? But it's a bit harder to do that with the technology.
Yeah, indeed. Making it learn seems like, you can... A human can break your trust if you tell them something and then they'll do that mistake again. An AI we also empathize with the way they work. We are actually the same technology. So we understand that if you tell a human, hey, please don't make this mistake, it's a mistake. And, we expect them to learn from that. If it's a piece of software and we point out something that's broken, it's not like it's going to fix itself because we point it out. You need to go and talk to the developers to make it happen. And maybe there's a middleware opportunity there for large models that act as interim bug fixers for AI by trying to monitor a specific bug and then correcting it in some haphazard way. But for now, it's there's a gap in between being able to immediately fix technology by telling it that something is wrong and actually having to fix it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of, V7 then from the technology and also, from a company perspective as well, obviously you've grown pretty quickly since inception. For you as CEO of V7, where do you see the company heading next? Is it improving technology? Is it expanding the use cases? What do you see happening over the next few months?
Yeah, it's been crazy. I think we were 30 or so people a year ago, and adding 70 people in this time frame has been a lot of effort, but also a lot of fun. You start to see. I'm now in the space in which I can take a half day off, and then things still happen on their own, and it kind of feels like magic. In a way, I think if you're someone who's really used to controlling a situation, because as CEO of a small startup, you usually have everything under your finger. You have a pulse on everything. It starts to become a bit more daunting because teams now have a life of their own and leadership of their own, and you're proud of it, but you're also wondering, like, how does this happen? It's sort of like a tribe that develops, and this gives us the ability to scale in different ways. We now can just get ambitious people and give them a broad goal, and then let them, for lack of a better term, figure it out on their own how to get there. It doesn't require a vision of the founders every time. It just requires a broad vision of where the company should be going. But it also gives the ability for other members of the team to really set their mark and create their own almost startup within V7. And we have these 4 values that we think guide people towards the right direction, towards the right light. One of them is moving the needle. So always do something that compounds, never do something. And this is something, for example, that in some companies, account executive might be privy to, which is that they will work for their own commission and targets, but they will not add something to the overall sales organization. We instead try to encourage them to do so. And to whatever you're doing, make sure it always adds something to the pile. And this has magical effects that humans aren't very good at rationalizing. Whenever you're doing something, if it's adds 0.1 effects to the overall experience, then by the time you do it 10 times or 28 times, it multiplies in incredible ways.
Yeah.
And another one is to have a level of reliability. So tell people when things are about to fail. So reliability is really important for us, not just when things are successful, but when things are going to potentially crack. And the other one is writing the new playbook. And that means learn what's worked really well in other companies up until now, and then write a new version of that for this new decade or for this new 5 years. And I think this is really important. There's concepts that are still in the startup Bibles, like move fast and break things, that are no longer relevant today. And we try to seek people that are excited about learning, about the Netflix culture book and document, and then being like, okay, well, this has been great. Let me throw it out and write a new version of this for the new values that people have in the post-COVID world, for the new technologies that we have that just enable a whole different way of collaborating across the world. We think that's really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how do you ensure those values are actually carried out in execution and day-to-day work? Is it the codifying of those? Is it the creation of playbooks that are derived from this?
Yeah, sometimes it's more religion than management. Sometimes just writing them down. And something we've discussed recently is we now have so much onboarding material. We use Notion for internal wiki, as most startups do, and becoming a beast that I don't think everyone reads everything.
No.
We started with having a reading list. Like, people would read 2 books before starting at V7. Now think they might read them in their first quarter at V7. So we're experimenting with things like, what if we were to print our company handbook and make it a physical copy? So we would mail it to people. And when people have a physical copy of something, they respect it a little bit more than a Notion page. And that kind of nudges them into the priority of what they should really learn first. The values, then, they just have to be repeated. We try to make sure that they are embedded in one-on-ones, that people read them before they score folks. In our HR platform, we have also scoring systems for 6-month reviews that encompass some of these values, and there's skills that point towards these values that we have. For example, like systems thinking is something that we score people on, and that's the understanding that people have about the entire company and their impact on other departments for their own individual work. And we find that people that try to think of how does this impact marketing, how does this impact the vision of the company, tend to do better. And if we encourage them towards that, then we also help them develop into better managers, better individual contributors. And ultimately, we want two things with people. One is that they leave V7 as a really elite person in their remit. I'd like us to be one of those companies that eventually people look at their LinkedIn profile, they're like, oh, you worked at V7, you must be good. And the other one is that they should see these years at V7 with nostalgia. And this one's actually really hard to achieve because it's still a job. At the end of the day, it's still work, but I would like them to look back and be like, wow, these were some of the most formational days of my life, and I actually had fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important and a really good vision and good perspective to have. One question that springs to mind, though, is especially with the type of growth in terms of headcount that you've described and those values. How have you found hiring generally, especially in a cutting edge area of technology as well? Has that been quite a challenge, or has that been something you've been able to navigate pretty well?
Yeah, it's difficult. I've learned the more. I'm terrible at coming up with metaphors on the spot, but if at some point your family and you had bread to the table, then your kids are going to be used to having bread to the table. Your wife or your husband is going to be used to having that to the table. And so we add these tiny little perks because we are more people. We're now doing lunches every Thursday. We get the entire team into a restaurant. It's a big team, so it's a really big lunch that we do all together. But it's that one opportunity to force everyone into the same room to talk and chat and have a beer sometimes. And these things actually takes quite a lot of admin and effort. And we moved from being a company which everyone had a job and then did the culture stuff on the side you do it for yourself, so that you would have a better time at work, to a company where there's people that are dedicated to creating these cultural elements of the team. And we found it to be quite important. We hired someone really excellent in our people operations to handle our retreats, our team building activities for remote and for in-person staff. And now I'm finding myself needing to expand this team because it pays off massively. It's a simple equation. If your office is, I'd say it's $500,000 a year. If you're a team of like 70 people, that's more or less what you're paying. And then you have employee productivity can shift. Let's say on a bad day, you might be 70% as productive. On a good day, you're 100%. Sometimes on a bad day, people are 50% as productive. If you can shift that productivity level up by 5%, then you're paying off rent. If you can shift it by another 5% because of cultural elements that you create, people are excited about the next, retreat. They're excited about the next fun QBR or in-person activity. Then you get another 5% payback. And so there's simply a simple profitability ratio in keeping employees motivated that just pays off. And so it's better to invest in that than to invest in, the next cool SaaS tool or.
No, absolutely. I can tell you're very kind of mathematically oriented in the way that you describe it. I think it's a very good way of looking at that problem. But how do you measure that? How do you go about determining, whether people are productive or not?
If I'm honest, I think it all comes from gut feelings, and then I try to justify it mathematically. So yeah. I can't give myself too much credit for being very analytical about it. It usually is that I think something is the case, and then I try to find a numerical way to justify it.
I think that's a good balance. I think that's a healthy way to do it, rather than try and force everything into, perhaps draconian systems that attempt to measure stuff that's really just a proxy and wrong most of the time.
Yeah, and I'm a relatively skeptical person when it comes to measuring. So I do not speak for V7 on this one. I'm not a believer in NPS myself too much. My customer success team knows it and obviously disagrees with me. And I'm not too much of I kind of feel like, at least because this is my own personal worldview experience, that surveys bias you towards the intention of the survey. And most of the time people survey you for an intent. Like NPS surveys you not to see that they're doing well, but to see that they're doing poorly. And every time I see an NPS tracker on a website, it makes me realize like, oh, these guys are losing it. They're losing the plot. Because why are you gauging whether we're doing poorly? But that is my own personal bias, and it's no news. At V7, we do use surveys, we do use NPS, and this is a way of tracking both employee engagement, which is something we're setting up now, and then customer engagement on the other side.
Yeah, no, really interesting and quite aware. We'll be talking for a little while. I want to be respectful of your time as well. But for any other, founders listening to this episode, going through that journey of scaling, what advice would you give them from your experience?
I think it's we're now talking about this in early 2023, and we're in a particularly unique economic time. And the advice I would give is really refine product market fit as much as you can in an era of maybe a year and a half of people pulling the belt a little bit and only going for either really, really polished version of whatever you're selling or things that are painkillers rather than vitamins. If you're an early stage founder and you're working on a painkiller product, something that people absolutely need to unblock something, then you're probably fine. If you're working on a vitamin, there's just an existential risk with overhiring today. And don't be too fooled from the amazing. We sort of went from 2021, in which there were no talent available out there unless you paid a ton of money for it, to a period of time which is incredible talent out there for cheaper. But don't be fooled by that. It's going to be we're basically paying today for some of the mistakes that we made in 2020 and 2021. And the important thing is for you to come out of it alive, healthy, and thriving at the end of this year with a very solid business model. So yeah, we're all in this together, and don't overhire for the time being.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I would definitely echo what you say about product market fit. I think it's always been important. Founders often make the mistake of being too product led and forgetting about the market side. And I think they've been able to get away with that for a little bit longer in the past than they can do now. But I still think the same principles hold true, right? They would still succeed or fail based on there. It's just about, what happens in between those 2 points that's perhaps a little bit different these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for talking to us today. I think it's been really, really interesting, from a few different perspectives on the business and culture side, but also on the AI side as well. Obviously, kind of hearing about, some of the developments, your technology, and the way that people are using it. And I think it's, an area that's only going to get more interesting over the next few months. So thank you for giving a bit of insight into the way that works.
Thank you. Always excited to talk about our journey. And thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.